Now, our guests will be making a case for improved global efforts to eradicate malaria. As always, you can join the conversation with the hashtag #BeyondMarket. You can also follow my Twitter handle too at Esther Ubudaga. Now, Malaria Must Die is a global campaign launched by former English professional footballer David Beckham. Now, the campaign is calling for new commitments to end the disease, which affected an estimated 216 million people in 2016 across 91 countries. Now, Africa carries a disproportionately high share of the global malaria burden, with 90% of the global cases and 91% of malaria deaths. Yvonne Chaka Chaka, South African singer, songwriter, and UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador for Malaria in Africa, joins me to explore ways Africa can eradicate this disease. Yvonne, thank you so much for taking the time out to join us today.
Hello, Esther. Thank you for having me.
Now, for as long as I can remember, Africa has been fighting malaria. It's a very old disease, and it's just sad that up till now, as we speak, there still isn't a cure. But, I mean, luckily, unfortunately, it's actually completely preventable. But let's hear your thoughts on how Africa as a continent, individual governments have been fighting this scourge.
It's actually very sad, Esther, that this old disease, keeps reinventing itself and keeps coming. We know that malaria is preventable and it's curable. And I must say that our governments in Africa have really worked hard. And thank you to all the other people, pharmaceutical companies, governments, civil society, and just different people out there working very hard to make sure that they combat malaria. But I think this time we need to make sure that our voices are heard loud and clear at the Commonwealth upcoming meeting in April, that we need to put our foot down and say malaria must actually die so that millions of people can live.
Now, although we've made a lot of progress, there have been milestones, and we've seen commitments from one decade to another. I was just reading, taking a look at the WHO World Malaria Report that came out at the end of 2017, and they identified a drop in commitment for the first time in a very long time. So I'm just thinking, are we looking at commitment fatigue here? I mean, it's such an old disease. Campaigns have been on for decades. So much money has been spent, so much energy has been spent. And I know that on the other hand, it's always said that Africa, should take the lead and should take responsibility and own the campaign against the fight against malaria. What are your thoughts?
I think the aim of this upcoming meeting, we really need to secure the political and the financial will. We need to make sure that different people come to the parties. I know sometimes we always urge government to do things. It's not only government's priorities to do this. It should be the business priorities. It should be civil society. It should be everyone. But I think because those people who make the laws are the ones who level the playing field, they have to do that. So we're calling on everybody to be part of this. We need the political will. We need the financial will. We need so much money to be put in R&D, because these mosquitoes, they keep reinventing themselves. They keep hiding in the blood. So we need to make sure that malaria is dying. Africa has been...
Now we know
Africa is just one of those countries who've had this. And this time, most of the people who are affected are people from the Commonwealth countries. Places like Nigeria and places like India. So that's why it's important that the 52 Commonwealth governments who are coming together have to be talking about this, because we can't be talking the same thing every time.
Now let's talk about, because when we talk about malaria, we usually talk about where it's prevalent, and of course some of the areas where it thrives, and what those countries or communities are doing to help minimize the spread. Now we know that it's usually prevalent in large communities in rural areas where there is poverty is rife and there's poor sanitation. And of course, there's always that spotlight on what those the government in those communities are doing to help spread awareness, ensure that, of course, there's a socioeconomic side of things, ensuring that there's better prosperity so that people go to school, there's education for the children, there's education for the parents, so they know what they're up against and they know how to fight malaria even on their own, doing basic things like, keeping their environments clean, using mosquito nets, treated nets, etc. So from that point of view, what is your assessment from your experience? I mean, being a Goodwill, UNICEF Goodwill ambassador, your experience, your thoughts on how at that level, at the grassroots level, what governments do, the kind of efforts they put into it at that level to help spread awareness and just getting everybody on board?
I think advocacy, and educating our people is something that is very important. I think we also have to teach our children at school, because children are the most smart people. They are able to disseminate information to their parents when they get home. They're game changers. So once we have empowered our children as well, they'll be able to go home and insist, to their parents that we need to sleep under the nets. Because the problem that I've seen is that when we distribute these nets, we go out there and we distribute the nets. We don't go back sometimes to go and check if these nets are being utilized. I've been to places like Tanzania and Kenya, where people use these nets for fishing. So education and conscientizing our community is something that is very, very important, because we can never win this war if there's not much education, if our children are also not empowered as well, and just ordinary people. We've seen healthcare workers going to different places. I mean, these are my unsung heroes, because these healthcare workers, they go to different places, they have little education, they have little amenities, they have very little resources, but they go to communities to go and impart their knowledge. So we need to educate our people, we need to empower our healthcare workers, we need to make sure that all the amenities to prevent malaria are there.
Now, you also mentioned when we started that, I mean, this disease, the malaria, the mosquitoes, they keep reinventing themselves. We get different strains just when we think that we're about to, find a cure or something, a different strain rears its ugly head. To what extent would you say this has made the fight even more difficult?
Well, I think, funding becomes a huge problem. And sometimes complacency, we just think we have combated malaria, or we are at the crossroad and we sit and fold our arms. I think we need not do that, because we always have to be on the safeguard. We always need to be ready. It's like going to war. You can't just sit and say the enemy is not going to attack. So you always have to be ready. So we can't sit there and say, yes, this time we did spray, this time we're not going to let people use the nets. We always have to be on the safe side to make sure that those pregnant women, children under 5, who are very, very vulnerable, are not being attacked by the mosquitoes. Because the problem here is when people just sit and say everything is okay, and then they find themselves being sick. And sometimes people who travel to malaria-affected areas and come back to countries where malaria is very low, and they get misdiagnosed. So we all know that malaria is a disease without borders. It gets imported, it gets exported. So those are the things that we have to safeguard ourselves from.
Okay, let's talk about this Malaria Must Die campaign led by David Beckham. And I know that this campaign is going to be taken to the next Commonwealth meeting in London in April this year. But let's start with how this came about in the first place. I know that, of course, I know what the motivation was, but, David Beckham getting involved and just this new movement for the Malaria Must Die. Help us understand it.
Well, I was just happy that a person like David Beckham, who's always been very helpful, he is a UNICEF Goodwill ambassador as well, was prepared, to lend his voice to this. And I'm actually very happy that he was the one in the tank, not me, to just have the sound of these mosquitoes just coming around you. But he was safe in that tank. So you can imagine a person who's sitting there, or a child who is helpless, having those mosquitoes surrounding him or surrounding her. So it's important that we talk to our governments, we talk to pharmaceutical companies, we talk to everyone who really cares about anybody's life to be part of this campaign, because it is important that our people should not be dying from malaria. I mean, in 2016, so many people were affected, and this is just 2 years ago. We were thinking that by 2018 we would have covered malaria in different countries. But you know, we are at the crossroads where malaria, we see the numbers going up. So we don't need to sit there and say everything is okay. We need to safeguard ourselves. We always need to be on guard and be ready. So thank you to people like David Beckham, who are always ready to help their lending hand and making sure that this campaign goes out there. But we need to urge governments, we need to urge pharmaceutical companies, corporates, civil society, and communities at large to be part of this huge campaign where we have to see millions of people living and malaria dying forever.
Well, what are you hopeful for as this campaign is taken to London in April to the Commonwealth leaders? What are you hoping will be different this time? There's several campaigns and they're all on simultaneously. But for the Malaria Must Die, what are you hoping could be new that this could spur this time around?
My hope is to see that there is going to be sufficient money, you know, for R&D. I want to make sure, I would like to see governments, more especially the Commonwealth countries. It's like, I'm a South African. I have to know what is happening in Swaziland, Zimbabwe, and Mozambique. We can't do it on our own. So we need some collaborations with different countries around us. I cannot think I'm okay when my neighbors are not okay. So we need to make sure that we collaborate with different countries, we collaborate with governments, we collaborate with corporates to make sure that we don't live in an island. We know that, and work together. I think the problem that has always been there, people have always been so disjointed. So if we cooperate, if we come together, we will really end this well. It's important that we know where the problem is, and we know where the solutions are. Now we need to make sure that they are implemented.
As we continue our discussion, still with me is Yvonne Chaka Chaka, South African singer, songwriter, and UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador for Malaria in Africa. Yvonne, thank you so much for your time so far.
Thank you, Esther.
Now, on the issue of research and development, and of course the pharmaceutical companies, I mean, I personally think that by now there should have been some kind of cure, but of course I'm not an expert on the subject. But in terms of research and development, would you say that Africa is doing enough in that area?
Well, I really think Africa is doing enough, but lots needs to be done as well. I think for me, it's the political will that we really need. Obviously, the financial will is very important as well. So we go to different countries and we ask for funding and other things. And it's important that the money that is given should go to where it's supposed to as well. So African leaders are really trying very hard. And you know, for me, it's just those ordinary people who would go into a healthcare center and not find medication. That becomes my huge problem. So we need to make sure that medication is there for the people, because the problem becomes when people go to a clinic or to a healthcare center and they do not find the medication, that becomes a huge problem.
Now, for the Malaria Must Die campaign, when this is taken to the Commonwealth this year, what happens from then?
Well, because most of the 52...
for it to become a much bigger movement?
Most of the 52 Commonwealth countries will be represented there. And you must remember that it's 90% of the people in the Commonwealth countries who have this burden of malaria. So if people care for people's lives, they will make sure that they adhere to all the things that we're asking for. It's important that everybody stands up now, because there's just so many things that are happening and there's too many asks. But this is an old disease that kills so many people. You know, 445 people died, 225 people were affected. We cannot allow that to happen. You can imagine children not going to school as well because of malaria. Absenteeism, whether it's people who are supposed to be working, whether it's teachers or nurses. That's why I constantly say there's absolutely no wealth without health and education. So when our people are educated, when our people are healthy, they'll be able to do work for themselves.
Okay, so are you also hoping for maybe some kind of policy pronouncement? Obviously more, like you said, political will, more of that is needed. And especially since the WHO brought out this report last year saying that they've seen a drop in commitment. Are you hoping that maybe something can be written down on paper, some kind of commitment from these leaders when you get to see them in April?
I think policymakers, you know, it will be very important for them as well. We'll need to change policies. We'll need to put everything down in paper, because sometimes these becomes campaigns, and after that everything dies down. I will ask and urge everybody that let's make this something very important every day. It shouldn't be just a campaign and then it dies down. So we need policymakers, we need government people, we need everybody to be part of this. This shouldn't be just a campaign for now and then there's this big hype and then it goes. We need to make sure that everything is written down and we adhere to it.
Is this going to be just one film, this film with David Beckham, or should we expect more from the Ridley Scott, the company that's putting this film together? Is this just a one-off, or should we expect more?
Well, I'm sure it will be, something else will be done again, but this time because the Commonwealth is going to be in England, we're very happy to have David Beckham making sure that he's highlighting this plight, and we're very grateful. You know, and to all those other pharmaceutical companies and all the government people and everyone, policymakers and our scientists as well, they have been doing all sorts of things. It's just that the world is a very funny world, because they would sort of listen to somebody who is very well known and somebody that people love. So I'm happy that David Beckham has become part of this. People have been doing this. Ordinary people have been doing this. It's either they're doing it in a form of a play or in a form of a song or in a form of an acting. So people know what the problem is. Let us just make sure that they've got all the nitty-gritties that they need to make sure that people are armed, people are educated, there's research and development, and people must just live. Because malaria is an old, old disease, and we cannot afford in the 21st century to have so many people. It was stagnant, but the numbers are going up now. What is that we're doing wrong? So we need everybody to come to the party. It is very important. So I urge you out there, just an ordinary person, to make sure that you clean your surrounding, because you know cleanliness is next to godliness. We don't need those mosquitoes to breed out there. So keep your surroundings clean, sleep under the net, make sure that you do allow people to come into your house to do indoor residual spraying. Campaigns are very good, but campaigns do not save lives. It's when we go down to the people and make sure that these campaigns we walk the talk. I think for me, that's what we want to do. We need to walk the talk and practice what we preach.
Now tell us, or briefly tell us, some of the work you've done as UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador for Malaria here in Africa.
Well, for the past 13 years working with UNICEF, we've done so much work. We've gone to different places. I remember a couple of years ago, I went to Tanzania and with UNICEF. And when we got there, the doctor said, look, the ward is empty, because people know what to do. People are taking medication, people are using their bed nets, and so the numbers have come down. As I said, I think because of complacency, we just think everything is okay, and then then the problem emerges again. So we've traveled to different places. The Princess of Africa Foundation as well, which is my foundation, works together with the UN and the people that we work with. We encourage children to be immunized. We encourage women to go to clinics as well. And we make sure that we walk the talk. When we go to different places, we don't go there and say to the people, this is what we want you to do. The problem that I've seen is that when people want to give information to people, they always tell them what to do. It's important that we go to different communities, listen to them, give them a hand up, not a handout. People do not need a handout. People need to be empowered. People need all the amenities to make their lives better because they know what their problems are and they know their solutions. So let's educate them, let's empower them, let's make sure that there is the political will that the people need.
Okay, so what would you say has been your biggest challenge so far, I mean, working on the ground?
Well, my biggest challenge walking in the ground is going to communities and you find that the nets have been distributed, but some of the people will not use the nets. They'll still be in their plastics. So what the Princess of Africa Foundation has decided to do is to go to those communities, unpack those nets, hang them, and tell the people that it is important to sleep under this net. Finding women who walk like 25 kilometers to a clinic. And the biggest problem is when they find there's no medication. If the medication is there after 2 weeks or so, they do not have the money to go back to the clinic. So we need to make sure that all the clinics or the healthcare centers are filled with the medication, because even our nurses and our doctors, they cannot work with limited stock of medication. So those are the things that really, really make me sad when women have to walk for hours and they get there and there's the shortage of medication. And we need to urge our governments as well to finance every health of their people or education, because when we go out and ask for that money, that should be just the cherry on top. So we doing things for ourselves is the most important thing.
Now, from your experience also working on the ground, looking across those countries here in Africa that are the most affected, which one stands out for you in terms of higher level of commitment and progress in the numbers?
I've seen such great progress in Rwanda, Senegal as well. Thank you to Dr. Awa Kulsek, who was the executive at Rollback Malaria. So when you have the commitment from government, when you have the commitment from the policymakers, then you really see that there is political will. It's actually very sad that some of the countries who in 2000 agreed that they will put in the 15% of the GDP for health are not even near that. So when countries like Rwanda are on 17%, they've surpassed what was agreed upon. So I need to urge different governments as well to start walking the talk, because, as I said, there's no wealth without health and education.
Now, I know we don't know how much longer we'll have to, be on this road in finding a cure to malaria once and for all. I mean, thankfully, it's preventable. But how hopeful are you that we will find a cure? Would you say that we're closer now than before to finding a cure based on what the research that has been done so far, especially by the pharmaceutical companies?
I really wish we could be closer because, as I said, this is an oldest disease and we are not finding a proper cure. You know, medication gets given out there, but sometimes, as I said, these mosquitoes, they then get very smarter than us. So I would urge people to put in more money in research and development so that our scientists are able to get a proper cure for malaria. But I've seen so many good medication out there, and I know that some of the anti-mezzanine, the plant is in Uganda as well. So Africa is waking up to wanting to do things for themselves. So we've got great scientists. Here in Cape Town, we have some professors who have come with some good pointers of making sure that they're getting the medication for malaria. So would need governments and pharmaceutical companies to support our African leaders as well, who are making a plan, because it's important that we don't look down on everything that is done by Africans. Sometimes we want things to be done for us by people outside, but we've got great scientists in Africa. So we need to give them a chance. We need to give them the support that they deserve to make sure that they get correct medication for malaria. And I'm hopeful that this would be done in my lifetime, and I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. All we need is the political will from every government and everybody out there, and the financial support that is needed to make sure that our people aren't dying from this old disease.
Yvonne, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today, and all the best with the campaign so far. And of course, when you go to the Commonwealth meeting in April. Thank you so much for talking to us today. I've been speaking to Yvonne Chaka Chaka, South African singer, songwriter, and UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador for Malaria in Africa.